everybody. My name is Karen Holton, and I'm here with Lorilei Potvin from the Angel Rock Show. I also have another show called the Quantum Guide Show, but this is an independent podcast that we wanted to do together because both Lorilei and myself have heard from Spirit. And so we want to talk a bit about the Truckers Freedom Convoy 2022. We want to look at the light side. We want to look at the shadow side. And then we also want to look at what this might be distracting everyone from. And then, of course, we're going to end it with some positive solutions so that you feel bolstered and ready to go with however you want to participate in what's going on right now. But first, Lorilei, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you again. I love working with you, Karen. We do a lot of work together, and it's always so good to bounce ideas off each other because we seem to be receiving very similar messages from Spirit. I am a Canadian psychic. Never mind, I'm going to change that to clairvoyant medium. I am a crystal Reiki energy healer, an Akashic Records practitioner, spiritual teacher and mentor. I'm a medical intuitive. I consider myself now a truth seeker and humanitarian activist and a podcast host. So I think I covered everything.
That's great. And we'll have the links for you folks in the description below so that you can find Lorilei and you can find myself.
I should add quickly, I'm so sorry. I always forget to say this. My show, The Angel Rock, is live on United Public Radio Network every Monday night from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Central or 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern. That's too late for someone. There's always a replay. So thanks again, Karen, for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this.
Oh, me too, Lorilei, and no problem. And as for myself, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit differently today. I'm actually a shamanic guide, which is all aspects of improving our life and our vitality. And I'm also a spiritual coach. So I don't want to say I'm a spiritual leader or teacher, but I do feel comfortable with the term coach. And I also have a website, and actually it should be along the bottom, the top. And Lorilei's contact will be along the bottom. Her YouTube channel will be along the bottom of this podcast. And so we're kind of pressed for time, and we have a lot of information to get through. So I thought, let's start with the pros or the light side or the light side of this Trucker Freedom Convoy 2022. And so the first thing that's the most obvious is it certainly gives people hope. How do you feel about that, Lorilei?
Absolutely. I think that somebody needed somebody to do something because people were feeling so alone. And it really showed us that we are not alone. We're united. And where we live, both of us in Canada, it spread like an infection, a beautiful infection around the world. And it's showing us that we really are the people we always thought we were. It's not what we were thinking. We were all alone.
Right, exactly. Yes, Lorilei's in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and I am in Red Deer, Alberta. The other thing is, and I'm going to be careful how I say this, don't take it wrong, but it also appears that because of this movement, people are feeling like their prayers have been answered, meaning that this is a solution that's going to be enduring. And unfortunately, that may or may not be true. It also really makes people feel good. And it also provides an opportunity for people to overcome their differences and to rebond or even bond better than what we've seen before. How do you feel about that, Lorilei?
I have to agree with it. But what I do, we've done a podcast about people looking for this knight in shining armor to come through that's going to save them. So yes, I agree this needed to happen. I think it's incredible. There is one person I'm going to give a lot of credit to, and I've heard from about 12 different people. I followed them for a long time, but it's almost been word for word. These people have been saying this. The real Pat King, he's called on Facebook. He has been very careful with the updates that he's given that, folks, even if we get what we want, this isn't even close to over. And God bless him because he's right.
I agree. Pat King brings out the best in people. And that's what this movement is basically about. And so these are the light or the bright aspects of this movement. But I think we need to take a look at the shadow. We really need to look at the shadow, because the shadow also exists whether we want to admit it or not. And sometimes the shadow brings up some kind of yucky feelings, so we don't want to look at it, but it's absolutely essential. Yes, I am working from some notes because I want to keep us on topic because we're limited for time. And the first thing that concerns me is the pushback from the powers that be. You could call it Mr. Global. I like to think of them as supervillains and their minions. We're not going to mention any names. Yes. It's funny, you're wearing a Superman and I'm wearing a Batman t-shirt.
And we didn't plan
talk about it ahead of time.
I didn't even know what I was going to wear, and I grabbed it. I heard Spirit say, wear your Superman shirt.
Absolutely. So the pushback is going to be brutal. Remember, these people are psychopaths. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about the truckers. I'm talking about Mr. Global, the supervillains, and the minions. They're psychopaths. They are without compassion and they're without remorse. And so a huge pushback is coming. I don't know whether it's today. It might be today, might be tonight, might be tomorrow. But that, that is the shadow side. Mr. Global and the elites are not going to just roll over and go, oh, okay, you guys can have your rights and freedoms back, and we're going to call this all off. We're going to start listening to you. That's pretty unlikely. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts are exactly that. And, as Spirit always looks out for us, for those that may not understand Spirit, we all have guides and angels, and those, we're never alone. The minute we take our first breath until we leave this earth, whether you believe in them or not, they believe in you. And no, I've been feeling this, hearing what I'm hearing from Spirit. And I love the way, how I started, how Spirit looks after us, because I kept hearing about this riot squad that didn't have to be jabbed. And I kept thinking, what is this? And I don't always follow Alex Jones, but I get a notification, got the notification, heard you need to watch this. No, I don't hear voices, by the way, it's within the mind's eye. And I opened it right to the page where Mr. Jones was reading a news piece that said over 4,000 police officers are set to lose their job in Southern California unless they, because they weren't jabbed, unless they sign up for the riot squad in Canada where you don't need to be jabbed. Now that opens a whole can of worms, because there's a difference between having, and we're seeing the dark side of our own people on the Mr. Global side in the way of law enforcement. But when you've got somebody from another country, if they're coming, there's a big difference. And I'm not saying everybody is evil, but I'm saying there's a big difference when it comes to empathy and compassion when you're dealing with people in this situation from the Mr. Global side versus if it was your own people. I hope that makes sense. And I have to agree with you. One other thing I'm going to add very quickly, and I haven't had a chance to send this to you today, Karen, is that there's this thing going around, and we talked to quite a few people through the internet. It's going across Canada that we need to call our Governor General's office, and we want to lodge a complaint against I'll call him the Prime Minister, and that enough people call, we've got a consensus that she's going to usher him out of office. But nobody read the link that they included with that, because when you read it, Canadians do not have a right in any way, shape, or form to get anybody to remove a leader that is in office, nor does she. She has to take it to our legislature. I know you know this, but for our listeners. And then they have to come to a consensus. There's a whole process. So this is useless for people to spend time on the phone. I imagine they're just saying, yes, okay, taking your name, ripping it up and tossing it in the garbage. So people don't know this. Even in our Canadian Bill of Rights, we don't have the right to do any impeachment, anything like that. So there's going to be a big change when all this finally comes to fruition. And I think that's what this whole year is about. But we'll get into that with solutions.
Yeah, we will be discussing solutions.
And I agree wholeheartedly, by the way, with what you're saying.
Thank you. So the other thing is the global elites, or Mr. Global, and what I call the supervillains and their minions, they own everything. Why do they own everything? Is it because they're so smart? No, they've stolen it all from us, but they have unlimited resources to turn against the convoy and anybody who stands a chance of making a difference. That has me extremely concerned. The other thing is that this movement kind of keeps people asleep, because instead of them being rattled to their bone to wake up, they're still putting their faith in the judiciary system. They're still putting faith in the legal system, and they're still thinking that they can return our culture and our day-to-day lives to the way things were before. And unfortunately, people need to wake up and see that it's all got to come down. It's been corrupt and horrible for a long, long time. And so we don't want people thinking like what you said, Lorilei, oh, here's our saviors. Our truckers are our saviors. They're going to give freedom back to us. Well, I still think that they're very much, it's a personal decision, and we have to do personal changes in our thinking and in our actions to help change things. What's your thought?
Well, the other part that I was going to add, and we didn't rehearse this ahead of time, but I knew I'd have time to fit this in. They came right at the same time, and it came from a woman who was sharing this. And she basically, in a nutshell, outlined that our prime minister is a puppet, really. He is controlled by I don't know if we can say his name or not, so I won't, but let's just say with Mr. Global. He's written a book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution and what have you. He's the Young Global Leaders Group. And that nothing is going to happen until the puppet master says it's okay. And it makes a lot of sense when you read this post. The other thing I want to say is we've had many from our opposition politics. This is going on all over the world, not just Canada. And what it says is that all these people that have been stepping up and saying, we're here for the people, we're calling him out, they have been trained and are still a member of the Young Global Leaders Group. Look it up if you haven't heard of it. You'll be quite shocked. But the whole thing is that I agree with you. All of it needs to come down. I mean, Justin T, I'll call him, his brother Kyle, half-brother, has been in the media quite a bit in interviews. Even he said this, that we are utilizing a system that was in place long before we had electricity, and we're still utilizing it, or, you know, we're supposedly electing someone to represent our views from where we live, yet we don't need that. I could send a message, so could you right now, halfway around the world, and it would be there in half a second. So we don't need this archaic system anymore, but I think this is what it's all about and coming to the surface. But no empathy, I agree. And you know what? People think that the leader, the face of all this, is the problem. No, there would just be another face behind him. Yep. And the other thing that they said very, very quickly was basically about waking up about this, recognizing this, and realizing that we kind of are the last stand, because the world is watching. And what happens here, because if our leader falls, and they talked about the dominoes, it was a really interesting post, and I will send it to you. And if you want to share it, you're more than welcome.
Wonderful. Yes, I agree. So I believe that everyone that's involved in the Freedom 2022 convoy is absolutely sincere. They're doing it out of the best of intentions. They're fine, fine people. They're wonderful examples to the rest of us. So I don't want to take away from that. But it is also a distraction so that citizens aren't seeing other things, like the new social credit score system. So people are all happy. Oh, wow, you know, the mandates are being lifted in this province and that province, and they're going to remove the vaccine passports. Whoops, I shouldn't say that word on here. But anyway, too late now. But they're going to remove the passports, and they're removing the restrictions. Yeah, but they're sliding in this whole social credit score. I actually think it's already up and running. And so it's a distraction from that. And that in some ways is even more serious than the mandates, than the jabs, than the medical aspects of this. And so I just wanted to say that and give you a minute to, if you want to comment on that,
Okay,
Laurel.
very quickly, I agree that this was convenient, the timing for this to happen. I do believe it's being taken advantage of. It was actually somebody in the US that made videos about this that I saw this. And she actually took the time to go through the government provincial websites, and she showed British Columbia and I believe it was Saskatchewan or Manitoba. They are almost 90% of the way there to get the new basically CHIP social credit. It's with the social credit system. It's the digital ID. We're seeing
Mhm.
in British Columbia, our farthest western province. For those that may not know, they've just come out with that you must have your papers to even access the dentist, many healthcare professional providers, and what have
Mhm.
you. So, what the last thing I'm going to add quickly, because I know we're pressed for time, is I believe where we're seeing this around the world, where these mandates are being lifted, that indeed this has already been, it's set to go. They just got to push go. And that's why they've lifted it. They don't need it anymore. They've got what they need.
Exactly. And we'll still need to have a QR code, which is something you put on a product, not a human being, that we'll need if we want to go to the dentist or if we want to take money out of the bank. So, people got to remember there are layers of things going on, nefarious things going on this planet. We got to not put all our hope into one small group. And the other thing, we talked briefly about how people are expecting a savior. Well, the problem is if people are really looking for a savior, they're actually they're setting themselves up for the false Messiah, and we know that's going to happen before the real Messiah comes. But people forget that, and they start going for this false Messiah, and I'm concerned about that. And then the last thing I want to say on the shadow side of the movement is that it might well launch global civil war. And if this happens, it's going to be literally bloody battles and huge loss of life. And go and watch some Netflix or something on the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Ottoman Empire, any of the empires. It's all the same thing. It's all just the same cycles of time. And here we are faced with it again. And that has me, also really, really concerned. And that, kind of doubles back to what I said earlier about these people are brutal. They're not messing around. They own everything. They have power that we can't even imagine. Mm-hmm. And so we need to do something besides this, something else that's going to help. But I want to take a look at some of the distractions. Do you have anything you want to say before I move on to the distractions, Lorilei?
I agree with you about the Netflix. I would suggest people take a look at the website deagle.com, that the population projections for 2025 will shock you. And there's other data before that we're seeing is very closely matching what's going on in the world when you get to the truth of it all. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Another person I would strongly suggest, this is a powerful, powerful 2.5 hour document. Well, it's not documentary, it's an episode with Del Bigtree of the High Wire. And it's called, I'll spell it, CHASING COVID. But the last hour is most important. There's a man on there by the name of Richard Armstrong. Please check his website out, Armstrong Economics. He has a computer that has predicted with accuracy, even 9/11, you name it. And it's not because it's psychic. It goes on what's going on the rise and fall of following the money, economics. And he said you could plug in the fall of Rome. And he said the reason why this is all happening again in a nutshell is because people do not change. They do not learn from history. And it just keeps following the same circle over and over. Mm-hmm.
I agree. Thank you for bringing that up. So people are going to say, well, what do you mean a distraction? What are we being distracted? I'm sure some of you are already familiar with what I'm going to say. And if you're a very sensitive person, you may not even want to watch this episode, because I'm going to talk about some fairly shocking things that are going on the planet right now. So there's a saying that is, don't let any good crisis go to waste. And that is something that the supervillains and their minions have always done. So they'll take something like this Freedom Convoy, they'll spin it as a really negative, terrible thing, and then they're going to use it to work their agenda. So they already know all the stuff we're going to do before we do it, and they're going to spin it, and it's going to really take our minds away from what we're not seeing. And so I'm just going to read off some points, and then I'll check in with you, Lorilei.
Okay.
So we as a species, we're being transitioned into transhumans. Now, at this podcast, we don't have the time and the space to get into what that means. Check out some of my podcasts, some of Lorelei's podcasts, but do research, find out what I mean by transhumans. So we're being transitioned into being an artificial life form, which is what a transhuman is. And besides the effect of the injected bioweapons, our food supply is transitioning into Soylent Green. And if you haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend that you watch it. So for years now, the mainstream diet has included genetically modified organism plants and animals, human meat, human fetal tissue, and insects. So we're already eating, if we're eating a mainstream or a fast food or a junk food diet, we're already eating other human beings, human fetal tissue, all the leftover byproducts from their organ transplants. And they use human fetal tissue also to create the jabs. A lot of people don't even realize that, but we'll get into more of that in a few minutes. So also scientists have long ago discovered our minimum nutritional requirements. And they're only going to supply enough nutrition to sustain our lives, but they're not going to give us enough to promote health or energy. And they're likely to blame the truckers for their planned food shortages. So what we're seeing is already people aren't well. They're lined up to see the doctor and going into hospitals even before this last 2 years. People are not doing very well. And it's because they are getting a minimum dietary requirement just to sustain their life, but not to promote health, not to give them energy or vitality, because it's the agenda to keep us subdued, quiet, and not feel our power. And another purpose of the transhuman agenda is to prevent us from activating our God-given natural spiritual capacities, which are genetically activated. So when they alter our genetics through the mRNA jabs, we are now no longer considered human, but our genetics have changed. So those mechanisms that allow for superior spiritual contact and an interchange, those things can't happen anymore. So Lorilei, do you have anything to say about any of these points?
I've been writing notes while you've been talking so I don't forget some important points. Agree 100% with you. People don't believe about the HEK239 fetal cells. Look up Cenomix. It's in many of your favorite fast foods. Those are aborted fetal cells. Look up coffee. Did you know, I believe, now don't quote me, but I believe 25% bug content is allowable in ground coffee. So
and also other things like flour and seeds and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's a huge amount of it.
Rodent feces, all kinds of stuff. This is not rumor either, folks. Now, the one thing I did want to include, I agree, and I always say this, and I know Karen says it, you don't have to believe a word we say. If something resonates with you, please do your research, look it up. But what I strongly encourage you to do is use various search engines, because you will be very surprised if you haven't done that to see what shows up and what doesn't, depending, say, if you use DuckDuckGo versus the main one we usually use. McDee's, I'll say, that Jamie Oliver, the world famous chef, just took them on and won his lawsuit. Of course, we didn't hear about this in mainstream media, but he did indeed prove the human components that were in it and many other things that are not fit for human consumption to be in these foods. When you were talking about how the food, absolutely, but also environmentally, we are getting it from the air, the clouds, we are getting it in the soil, we are getting it from all over our water sources. We're
Mhm.
80% water. We need water. The other thing I want to mention very quickly with these jabs that people are not aware of, and it seems to be the third and on up, I do believe that we are going to be seeing an epidemic of HIV developing into AIDS. And again, people say, well, it's curable. It's not curable. And believe me, God bless them that there's something they can take, but it is no life. It is handfuls and handfuls and handfuls of pills. You're ill all the time. And the reason I mention this is because they're in the injection, 3 different strands. That is not conspiracy theory. The other thing is, if you're, say, monogamous, or you're not part of the LGBTQ community, you're not an intravenous drug user, you're in a monogamous relationship, what will be your impetus to go and have that kind of test? And when we don't have the test and have early treatment, that's when we end up with end stage AIDS. Lastly, and I've been saying this for a long time, I have been getting from spirit zombie. Now, not what we're seeing on Walking Dead and things like that, but I
Mhm.
agree with Karen about the transhuman agenda. And the part of these jabs, part of this was to be able to upload various medications and treatments to what is in your body that they could treat something. You don't have to be going to a doctor or what have you. We haven't even got into the fact that you have a serial number and you look up the laws. You can be owned now because you're genetically modified. That is not a rumor. Lastly, Flocka. I've been seeing this. I've been seeing what happens when people take this. It becomes superhuman almost. You will not, there's all kinds of videos. You can see people on it. It looks like they're possessed. And I just got this recently. God help us if they upload something like that to these people that have received all these jabs, because
Mhm.
they don't even know what they're doing. You will not believe what you will see on these videos. And again, this is not tinfoil hat conspiracy wearing stuff. This is true with Flocka. Look it up. Mhm,
Mhm. Thank
mhm.
you. Thank you so much for all that supportive information. I really appreciate it. The other thing I want to say is, I grew up and abortion's been a reality in Canada for a while, but it used to be that it had to be done before 3 months. What people aren't realizing is the fetal tissue that's being used in the jabs takes 80 or 100 um, very late term babies. And this is shocking and disturbing, but I gotta say it. They're using late term babies. So they're using them either full term or shortly after they're born even, and they have to be alive while they harvest the components to go into the jabs. And not just these jabs, the jabs that everybody gives their kids. This has been going on for a while. How friggin' horrible is that? And that takes me into another thing that I want to talk about, how the trucker movement is also a distraction from the supervillains and their minions who are abusing millions and millions of children everywhere. Now, this is going to be quite graphic, so if you're sensitive, you might want to switch off now. I'm just going to let you know. And I'm just going to read, I'm not going to go into the gory details. I'm just going to read in point form what some of these atrocities might look like. So they're using children for rape and sexual exploitation. They are using children for religious sacrifice. They are using children, and this includes babies, as a food source. A lot of them are into cannibalism. And then, of course, there's slave labor. And then there's scientific experimentation. Lorilei and I both know Kevin Annette, and he's talked about how the First Nations children in Canada have been experimented on since the 1940s, 1950s, and this is going on all over the world. Then there's organ transplants. They're being used for organ transplants, and that's where you get the leftover meat that's going into our food supply. And then just unbelievably horrendous is the child derivatives like adrenochrome and the live mature fetal cells, which they're using to create pharmaceuticals. Now, we're not going to get into too much of this stuff. It's pretty horrific, but do the research. Don't believe what we're saying. Do the research. And so when everybody's dewy-eyed, oh my goodness, you know, the convoy is going to save us and bring us back our freedoms. They're not looking at all this horrible, horrible shadow side of what's going on the earth. So this may not be the shadow side of the movement, but it's certainly the shadow side of what's going on earth today. And of course, they want us to be distracted as much as possible, you know, from that. So the supervillains and their minions, they view humanity as a herd of defective beasts. And they consider themselves as engaged in agriculture, raising living organisms for food and raw materials. They will never feel guilt or remorse for their actions. Turn it over to you, Lorilei, if you have anything you want to say about that.
I had a look on my face when you said religious. And what I'm going to just add to that is, it is not the religious that you think you know, it serves another master. And we're talking about if you believe in a heaven and down below, that's who they serve. Many of our politicians, many of the people in Hollywood, many people that people put up on a pedestal are involved in this. The other thing I've heard us refer to as the useless eaters. We are using all their resources. Check out the Georgia Guidestones if you don't believe us. Nobody seems to know where this has come from. And it's in, I believe, 8 different languages. And I can't believe the amount of people I run into that had no idea this even existed. It just showed up one day. They are hoping to bring the human population down to 550 million, I believe. Now, again, this doesn't have to necessarily do with the truckers, but this has been going on behind all of this stuff. So now, you know, people are happy, they're pulling together and the world's watching. And so everything goes on behind the magic curtain. We don't notice the little man what they're doing. And they've had over 100 years to more than that to perfect this. I really believe they've been using we've got an autism epidemic right now. When you look at some of the movies out there, VAXXED, excellent documentary. The physician involved with that, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, what a hero. You look at what he has uncovered, and he's a gastroenterologist. He didn't know much about this. When you look at this and you see this, you just take that word autism out of there and plug in any other word you want, what's going on right now, and you realize they use those kids first. And I have a son with autism as well, so I have to be an expert. I'm his mom, I'm his advocate. Just a few quick notes here, Karen. I agree though with the fetal tissue. If you're not sure about that, and Planned Parenthood and eugenics, please look up Project Veritas with James O'Keefe. He has people on hidden camera admitting what they do with those bodies. I am a registered nurse. One of the floors I worked on, and I wasn't aware when I started, they did late term abortions. And my biggest fear, because we did them up to, I believe 25 weeks. And I was praying to God one was never born live. I wasn't a mother yet. And I cried every single time because they go through labor, they deliver these babies. Then I went to the NICU and we're saving some babies at 25 weeks. I had such a hard time. I still do. And I'm a mother now. I wasn't a mother then. Lastly, I wanted to add, look up the Red Shoe Gang. You mentioned it, Chrome. They also have women that are trafficked, and they're breeders. They're just meant to be there. They hunt children like this. There are many survivors of this. It's called SRA. Look it up. You will see it, and be prepared though. Be prepared. Don't have children in the room. Lastly, I wanted to add was there's a documentary I saw recently. Well, it's probably about a year ago, and I made myself watch it. It was so horrific. It was in Polish, and it was over in Germany, and it was a documentarian covering the child trafficking and people selling their children for money because they're very poor over in the Ukraine, certain parts in Poland. And the system they have set up there, I don't know how they're ever going to stop it. And I was crying. I'm not a crier. And I kept saying, this this is killing me to watch this. And I remember my partner, Dal, saying to me, then don't watch it. I said, I need to watch this
Mhm,
because if I can't barely watch this, imagine what these poor fellow human beings are going through.
mhm, mhm.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So now we've exposed the shadow side of the convoy and the shadow side of what's going on in the world and what we're being distracted away from. And I know it's pretty shocking. And again, I urge you to do your own research. But now we're going to move into some solutions because there are some solutions, okay? And it's not hopeless. And I think the biggest solution is the wicked must be removed. Now, how are the wicked going to be removed? Well, there are all kinds of special ops and different kinds of spies and different kinds of warriors in the world who do not agree with what's going on, and they have special skills. Now, I'm not suggesting that this should happen. I'm just saying this is one of the options that came to me, and that was assassination by the elite forces who want this horror to end. That is a possibility. I don't think it's a really big one, but it is possible, and it might be a partial solution. And I'm not advocating violence. Please don't get me wrong. I'm just saying this is what came to me, okay? The other thing is supervillain family betrayal, exposing the truth. So, Lorilei, do you want to talk a little bit more about Kyle Kemper, who is our prime minister's half brother, who has been speaking out? And also, I think Doug Ford's daughter has
Oh,
also
yeah.
been speaking out. And so, family members are waking up to what's going on and they're exposing them. And of course, the more light we shine on this darkness, then it can't operate because it's like the cockroaches, they only come out at night. Lorilei, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, what I want to tell you too is the reason why most people don't believe this, because we've never heard or seen anything like this except in movies. And people just can't believe that other human beings could be this diabolical and evil. But we wouldn't sit here and talk about this. Karen and I done this type of work for a long time. Karen, much even longer than I have. And with Kyle Kemper, JT's younger brother, or I mean half brother, I I am very happy that he's coming out of the woodwork and speaking out against his brother. But am I always naturally suspicious? No. But when my spidey senses start tingling, I am going to say this. I do believe that he has his own agenda. He's a big proponent of cryptocurrency. And everybody's talking about cryptocurrency. This is where they would like to go, right? Because crypto is not traceable. And he's talking about open source. Who I
Mhm.
just mentioned earlier, this Richard with the computer, on Richard Armstrong. He said, all we need is one big EMP strike and it wipes everything out. There's no money. How do we get our great reset then, right? Nobody's got
Mhm.
any money. You could have billions in there. Other thing they're doing, buying up land. Okay. But
Mhm.
my whole point is you're right about family being, at least he's coming out and he's speaking out against his brother. He's very careful. I see what he says. And I understand that he's in a precarious position. I've also been seeing now people are starting to dig into the rumor about our prime minister's father, of who he may very well be. And when you dig
Mhm.
into his father, not his biological father, but whom his namesake is, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, that's the thing about Canada too. We have no length of term. Right? He was in power for 28 years and everybody loved him. They thought he was a great prime minister. When you start digging, and the apple does not fall far from the tree, folks, when you start finding out, okay? So I think that's a very viable option because I got to be honest with you. I'm going to mention very quickly Doug Ford. For people who don't know who he is, he's our dictator premier. So he's like a senator or governor that you might have in the States, or depending in your state or provincial government who represents you, right?
Mhm.
His daughter, and I follow her, and I was just cheering her on because I can't imagine the courage it takes to come out and speak out against what your father is doing or your mother. So that's very, very, very important. But I notice, like I say, people are picking up bits and pieces of people's history now, and it's starting to come out. What I see it as, excuse, a torrent of information that is coming out so quickly. And I feel like the energy, especially in Canada, is like a tornado. And I literally get the picture of the supervillains hanging on by a hair. Because I'm going to tell you, folks, one of the solutions is their only weapon is fear.
Mhm.
Knowledge is empowering. And when we stand together, united in who we are so much more powerful. We are so much more incredible. We have gifts that we've been told are never possible. They are, and more. And that's what they fear. So we lose the fear, they have nothing left, right? Are they going to get us to listen to them? We're not afraid anymore. That's the
Mhm.
solution right there.
It
Mhm.
sure is, Lorilei. Thank you so much. Now, because we live in Canada and in the Western world, most people are, well, I don't even know if it's most anymore, but most people are familiar with the Holy Bible and with Scripture. And so I just want to say that another solution is an act of God, literally
Mhm.
an act of God. And I got a couple scriptures that back me up. Ephesians 6:2 warns about the dark forces that control the governments and the affairs on the earth. Now, I remembered this scripture from my childhood, and I went looking for it, couldn't find it under Google, under any of those Bible searches, couldn't even find it on DuckDuckGo. Instead, what kept coming up is these scriptures that said we're supposed to obey the government because they're put into their position by God. Well, first of all, I don't want to get into too much about that, but I know clearly Ephesians 6:2 warns us about the dark forces. The other thing, too, is if you look back on the life of Jesus Christ, at one point he was offered all the earthly kingdoms in exchange if Jesus would do an act of worship to Satan. Now, how could Satan offer all the kingdoms of the world if he didn't own them? He'd have to have control and he'd have to be able to own them in order to offer that to the Christ. The other thing is, so I just want to say this is a good versus evil on a grand scale. And we have to rely on higher forces to create a permanent remedy. So whatever you believe in that and go to those sources. Because I don't believe that Christians are the only ones that have the right way. I think that we're looking through different perspectives and seeing the same thing, but from different places. Because what we all have in common is to harm none, to treat other people the way we want to be treated, to forgive other people the way we want to be forgiven.
Mhm.
All of them have these common threads
Mhm.
of a loving Father or God or whatever. So I really strongly believe that. And then John 15:19 and also John 17:16 says to be no part of this world. And in other words, we have to stop supporting the very systems that are exterminating the faithful. So look into who owns where you do your banking, who owns where you shop for food, who owns where you get your clothes from. Everything we do, check out where it comes from. If you have investments, are they ethical? Where is that coming from? Because everything we buy, sell, and do is supporting these forces who basically want to exterminate us. And I have a few concluding comments, but I wanted to just turn, we're running out of time very quickly, but I want to turn the floor back over to you, Lorilei, so that you can add your perspective as well.
Very quickly, I'm going to tell you that if you go open Pandora's box, be prepared because the Catholic Church is a big player in this as well. And the last thing I'm going to add very quickly to support everything you've said, and I heard this in the beginning many years ago of starting this journey of truth seeking, follow the money. Follow the
Mhm.
money trail. You will see it's the same names that lead right around, and then you will know what you are supporting and how many small, there's not that many when you get to the top that filter out and you realize how much we are actually supporting our own demise.
Mhm. So we got to live in the world, but we don't have to be a part of it. So we don't have to buy into the New World Order. We don't have to buy into these schemes and these different things. We don't have to buy into that. In fact, we need to be aware of them so we can keep ourselves separate. And I think that's really, really important. And that goes for the vaxxed and the unvaxxed. You know, I think we all have a responsibility to play. So in conclusion, I think that this Freedom Convoy is a very positive thing. And I think that everyone should keep going, keep making it happen, but take it to the whole world. And we can't stop or let down our guard until all of the evil is gone. So whether, you know, and we're doing that personally through our own sovereignty. We're doing that by, you know, reaching out to our spiritual forces. We're doing that by the choices we make. There's so many ways that we can do that. Now, before I conclude completely here, I will have a few words from Dr. David Martin. But before I read that off, I just want to give you another chance, Lorilei, to add your conclusions and your comments.
It's just a few things. I support you 100% in everything you've said. Lastly, two things. First of all, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So if you hear in the future that we've got, you know what, we're going to take all your debt away, right? We're going to take it all away and we're going to give you money. And then they may tell you that you got to sign over your house or whatever. Remember, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it probably is a duck. That's why we're telling you these things, to give you the time to process, to research. Many people, when they actually do wake up, realize their whole life has been a lie. And there's some grief that you have to process with that too. Lots of people like ourselves that are out there to help support you, welcome you, love you. And we know that this is going to happen. It's happening on a mass scale now. That's about it. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I have a few words that were taken from a video called COVID Exposed, Part 9 of 12, and it's available on Rumble, and it features Dr. David Martin. It's fairly lengthy, but I really recommend you watch the whole show. Lorilei is the one that sent the link to me. And I just gleaned a few of his closing comments that I'm now going to give to you. He says, we don't need hope, we don't need belief, and we don't need trust. Most of us still have it pretty good. And we're in a position to create a beautiful next chapter. Consciousness will become a choice. And it's the way that we manifest the new reality, the one that we want. He suggests that we gray rock the narcissistic system. And if you don't know what gray rocking is or narcissism, more research for you to do. But he suggests we gray rock the narcissistic system and grasp with certainty all of the good that surrounds us. He says our powerful epigenetic energy is unconquerable when we stand in our own power. They cannot take that away because it's not theirs to take. Our lives are a persistent energy field which cannot be destroyed or taken. So there is no existential risk. He suggests that we have compassion for those who do not yet recognize their own power. We are living in interconnection and we must embrace each other in love. Living is not the avoidance or absence of death. We can live and have fellowship in this persistent energy of the universe. We can focus on love and compassion, and we can face life without fear of judgment. And I thought that was very encouraging. It sure warmed my heart when I heard it. And the other thing I want to say is also in conclusion is please do check out Lorilei's show. It's on UPRN radio. Is that right, Lorilei? It's called The Angel Rock with Lorilei.
You can usually find it under UFO Paranormal Radio. If I'm doing topics like this, I won't be streaming to YouTube, but you can find my YouTube channel there. And that's how you'll see it. And there's always an archive. We're carried wherever podcasts and talk radio is carried. you will find our archives.
Wonderful. And please do subscribe to both my channel and Lorilai's channel, YouTube channels. And I'm also available on Odyssey. And I have a weekly show called the Quantum Guide Show, which is a show for people who are either newly awakened or people that are awakened, but they're really isolated because most people don't believe or know what they know. And so it gives an opportunity for fellowship to see how other awakened people are doing things and seeing things. It's a great learning opportunity. And then, of course, there's all the independent podcasts that Lorilei and I have been more and more doing together. It's really interesting, just like our T-shirts that are so similar, different, but similar. Yeah. We didn't talk about this. I got Batman and she's got Superman. We just have this incredible rapport with spirit where we get a lot of the same messages at the same time. So stay tuned, be brave, grab your panties and get going, do your research, encourage each other, and focus on love and compassion. These are tremendous energetic weapons that we can use. And let's change this world by facing the shadow and overcoming it, rising above it. And so thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll be back soon.
Bye, everybody. Much love and light.